On today's episode of Life Embodied, protective strategies are not abstract things in our minds, but very real embodied states. You need to do them in your body for them to have an effect. You don't cognitively suppress emotions. It involves effort in the body. Even beliefs have a physical component, and through the body, we find a potent way to identify automated patterns and ultimately interrupt them. Welcome to Life Embodied, where we explore how an embodiment practice can support us in meeting the challenges of life. How can we surf the waves of life deeply anchored in the safety of our bodies? How can we learn to trust our capacity to be with intense sensations and emotions? How can we cultivate body awareness, and why does it matter? Episodes include interviews with experts and practitioners that bring their knowledge and passion and share practical tips for your everyday life. I am your host, Katharina Alf. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the conversation. Welcome, everybody, to today's solo episode of Life Embodied. Outside of this podcast, I work as a somatic therapist and give one-on-one sessions to people. And in these sessions, I teach people how to let go of limiting patterns. And this is what I want to explore with you in this episode. What are limiting patterns? What triggers them? How do they manifest on a physical level? And why are embodiment tools such a potent way to update outdated survival mechanisms? Let's unpack this bit by bit. But first of all, I want to say a few general things about personal development and transformational processes. Personal development, therapy, self-reflection, these things are en vogue right now, which is great. But they can lead to a kind of obsession with your personal process and an urge to keep improving yourself. So I think it's super necessary to be very clear about why we even bother and what it is we would like to achieve. Self-examination is a means to an end, not an end in itself. The goal is not to examine yourself to the core, but to examine yourself just enough so you can then participate in life in a way that feels good. I don't know if you've noticed, but people talk excessively about being triggered. Usually, they mean that something made them angry, scared, or upset. Let's say they exaggerate to illustrate. Fine. But let's also be very clear. Being angry, scared, or upset is not the same thing as being triggered. And it is important to point this out, because treating your emotions as if they are wrong, problematic, or inadequate pulls your attention inwards instead of dealing with the situation that caused your emotions. Right? If you perceive your emotions as the problem, you will be busy with yourself. And if you perceive that something outside of you is the problem, you will deal with that something outside of yourself. Which ultimately is what life is about. Interaction with the world. Don't get me wrong, checking the adequacy of your inner reaction is a great thing. But I observe the tendency, not only in myself, but in people around me and in clients, to deal with emotions as if they were the problem and not the situation that caused them. And this is sometimes true, but it is not always true. Instead of dealing with the situation that made us angry, scared, or upset, we take responsibility for our triggers and then completely get lost in that process. We self-diagnose, analyze, psychologize, navel gaze, start transgenerational digging, and we forget to deal with the thing that upset us, as if the anger was the issue, not someone's unethical behavior that was witnessed. And it can be both. Our anger can be the issue. But the issue can also be outside of yourself. And I think this is something that is increasingly forgotten. It looks like an unexpected outcome of the whole mindfulness trend, meditating, self-reflecting, therapy, and spirituality. These things flooded our culture in the last decades. And examining patterns of our behavior is, of course, not wrong by all means, but it can become a trap, a dead end, because life is not lived in self-reflection, but in participation. In fact, overthinking, analyzing, and shouldering every bit of responsibility can in itself be a survival strategy. But it can also simply be a habit, trained by therapy, reinforced through social media, and encouraged by people's unsolicited human design, inner child, and shadow work advice. The goal is not to examine yourself to the core, but to examine yourself just enough so you can then participate in life in a way that feels good. The question is, how can I move through life with integrity? And if necessary, you examine what stands in the way of that. Self-reflection is in order when participation is repeatedly unsatisfying, not possible, too scary, or unattractive. Self-examination is a means to an end, not an end in itself. Okay, now that we established that, let's move on. So what does being triggered actually mean? In psychiatry, the term has a very narrow definition and refers to sensory stimuli that trigger flashbacks. I think it's fair enough to broaden the meaning a little bit, because even if you are not traumatized in the clinical sense of the word, you still know this experience in a milder form. We all do. Being triggered then means that a situation reminds you of a situation from your past that was in some way overwhelming. Your system then automatically provides strategies to deal with the situation. You don't really get a say in this. It happens automatically and unconsciously, as if a trigger was pulled and now the bullet flies. The purpose of the strategy is to protect your system from overwhelm, which is extremely important. But what was overwhelming in the past might not necessarily be overwhelming today. These automatic strategies usually stem from a time when you were more vulnerable, had less agency, less regulation skills, less emotional capacity, and were very dependent on your surroundings. A child. Which explains why actions from a triggered state can be a little immature. It explains why emotions in triggered states feel very dramatic and urgent. You might even feel very young in this state. A triggered state is an emergency response that once was a creative act of adaptation. We all learn to adapt to our surroundings when we are little. And we continue to do so for all our lives. That's a good thing. Remember, survival of the fittest, the one that fits best, survives. If we live as free people in a free country, we can more or less choose our surroundings when we are grown up. As a child, we cannot choose who we live with. We can't say, "You guys suck, I'm moving out," if someone treats us badly. And we cannot start a conversation on eye level about our boundaries and wishes, as long as the other side is the number one role model for all of those qualities. And has, by the way, power over all resources. We have to get along with whoever takes care of us. If we are lucky, they provide well. But since we are all human, they will have limitations in meeting us. So we adapt. And here is an important detail. Usually we take responsibility for our caretaker's inabilities, as if our needs and feelings were the problem and not their reaction to them. What else are we supposed to do? Call them out? No. We believe it is our fault and we adapt. Jamie Cato uses a beautiful picture for this tragic yet necessary process. He describes our innocent soul as a big palace with many, many rooms. Growing up, we learn which rooms people don't like so much, and we close them. Sometimes we seal off whole corridors and put up a sign, "Beware of dragons." Ultimately, we end up with a boring little apartment and wonder why we lack aliveness and long for being more enchanted by life. People often come to me with a nagging sense that something wants to get out. They are very afraid what might happen when it does. Again, adaptation is necessary and useful, and maybe even once saved your life and your sanity at a point where there were actual monsters down that corridor. Yet today, drawing your sword every time you see a corridor, aggressively stopping others from going there, or judging the filthy dragon lovers, might not be necessary or helpful in your life now. Outdated protective mechanisms need updating, because they limit our perception of reality and limit the amount of options we have for responding to life, to people, to situations. This is why we talk of limiting patterns. There is nothing wrong with patterns in general, but if they limit you, you lose choice and agency. It is similar to navigating with an outdated map. Being triggered means your system reports alarm because you are about to enter forbidden territory. And you know very well that in the past it was not a good idea to go there. It involved an inner experience that you were unable to deal with and felt very alone with. Back then, dragons were too much. Yet it's not all about pain and fear and dragons. It can be about pleasure and silliness too. Have you ever been sent from the dinner table because you couldn't stop giggling? Or have you ever gotten shamed for your sexuality, your intellect, your curiosity? We shut down all kinds of sensations. Pain and fear are usually involved because cutting off parts of yourself is painful, and getting back in touch with them is scary. But what lies behind the pain and the fear is hidden treasure. Being triggered actually points to treasure. What triggers you marks a spot on your map where treasure is buried. Like touching the electric fence that guards the land of milk and honey. There is no actual forbidden territory within yourself. If you work up the courage to go past the fence, you'll salvage lost parts of yourself, unused capacity for depth, intensity, sensation, creativity, silence, pleasure, power. You will find what you successfully protected back when it wasn't safe to be all that. The fence, the pain, the fear, the trigger is proof of your innate knowledge of what is worthy of protection. My friend Jette puts it so well. She says, "The ways we learn to protect ourselves are the ways in which our willingness to survive and our dedication to love express themselves." End quote. You being triggered is proof that you once knew what was true and beautiful, and you instinctively protected it. And you still do. Whenever the forbidden string is touched and makes a sound, the wall goes up. What triggers you is a specific sensation that until now never was safe to be experienced. Ultimately, you react to a specific flow within yourself. Yes, maybe someone's behavior makes you angry, but what triggers you is your anger. Maybe someone scares you, but what triggers you is your fear. Maybe someone excites you, but what triggers you is being excited. Otherwise, you would simply be angry, scared, or excited, which in itself is not problematic at all. If a sensation triggers you, you experience it as problematic, dramatic, bad, and start to tell yourself all kinds of stories about it. Depending on your very own strategy, you'll do all kinds of things to it, whatever it takes to not feel it. Now, the thing is, even if I'm talking in metaphors right now, these protective strategies are not abstract things in our minds, but very real embodied states. You need to do them in your body for them to have an effect. You don't cognitively suppress emotions. It involves effort in the body. Even beliefs have a physical component to themselves. And through the body, we find a potent way to identify automated patterns and ultimately interrupt them. How to identify limiting patterns. Since they happen automatically and unconsciously, identifying patterns might not be easy. Here are a few indications: repetition, depression, aggression, urgency or rush, physical pain or other symptoms, brain fog, doubt, and ambivalence. Let's look at them individually. Repetition. It is a characteristic of patterns that they repeat themselves. If you end up in the same relationship dynamic over and over again, you are repeating a pattern. If you keep seeing the same thing in objectively different circumstances, your perception is very likely limited. If thoughts, feelings, situations, conversations, or moods repeat themselves in a way that is unpleasant or unsatisfying, some examination is in order. Depression. Big one, big topic. Just a little bit about it today. I am not necessarily talking about depression in the clinical sense, but the experience we all know. Feeling lethargic, numb, lacking drive, everything seems bland, boring, futile. A depressed state indicates strong inner repression. This needs investigation. Aggression. Feeling irritated and annoyed, hating people, and strong resistance against things or people you usually love means something is up. Trust this sensation and follow it, like Hansel and Gretel are following the breadcrumbs back home. Urgency and rush. Remember how protective patterns are emergency responses? Accordingly, they often come with a sense of danger. If you feel that it is super urgent and important to respond right now, take a step back. Physical pain or other symptoms. The world of emotions is not always easily accessible. Sometimes the tip of the iceberg is physical pain or a recurring symptom. This is not because your body creates a metaphor, but because your body is very involved in upholding the limiting patterns. It takes physical effort to keep the closed rooms of your palace shut. And this physical effort, over time, leads to pain and other symptoms. So this recurring back pain you know since your 20s, the bladder infection that keeps coming back, or your irritable gut that seems to be stress-related, it might be the door to a hidden corridor. Brain fog, doubt, and ambivalence. This is a big one, and almost always part of a triggered state. Losing orientation, difficulty to discern what is important and what isn't, going in circles in your own mind. Being triggered makes us dumb, and it makes us doubt ourselves, our perception, and our abilities. Being triggered can lead to constantly second-guessing our decisions. If you end up in the same state of disorientation over and over again, dig deeper. This list is incomplete, and to each category there are many subcategories. Sometimes we experience trigger cascades where one state leads to the next, or is accelerated by a session of trigger ping pong with someone else. But you get the idea. How patterns are embodied. Emotions are sensations. They are never abstract things in our mind. You feel them in your body, right? You know how fear feels, anger, joy, excitement, grief. Just me saying these words might resonate in your body like an echo of the experience that you know. Our needs are very embodied as well. You feel when you are hungry, thirsty, tired, need the toilet, want a hug. In order not to feel these things, you have to do effort in your body. You have to actively repress the associated sensations. You have to numb, cut off, ignore, block, freeze, close, tense, twist. When you are triggered, this is what you do. You do a very specific set of actions in your body to cope. You invented this at some point when you had no other option, and you repeated it so often, or the impact was so strong, that you continue to do this to this day. Automatically, unconsciously, deeply embodied. How to let go of limiting patterns. Making unconscious patterns conscious is the first step in transformational processes. We want to regain control over automatic reactions. And we want to reintegrate lost parts of ourselves. Let's get practical. And a little disclaimer before we start. Don't do this if you feel emotionally very unstable or are at a point in your life where you lack support and stability. Now may not be the time to attempt transformation on your own. Please find appropriate support. This podcast is not a substitute for medical or psychological advice. I will now guide you into a little inner investigation, and if you feel safe and are curious, you are welcome to join, or you can simply listen. Okay, so first of all, let's take a couple of deep breaths. You can put your hands on the sides of your ribcage and breathe fully into your chest. Allow your ribcage to expand into your hands as if you wanted to stretch it from the inside. Breathing out, you can gently push with your hands to squeeze out the air. Continue to do this in your own rhythm. Breathing fully raises your level of energy. Consider breath the fuel of your transformation. Return to breathing whenever you need it. Okay, if possible, you can even stand up, shake a little bit, jump a little bit up and down. Maybe stretch in all directions, your arms, your legs, your back. Yes, bring your body online. Now, bring your attention to a place that sometimes feels uncomfortable or sometimes hurts. It might be this place between your spine and your shoulder blade, or your lower back, your knee, your neck. I think everybody has one or two places that sometimes act up. Go there with your attention. If there are multiple places, pick one. Notice how this place feels. Do you perceive any tension or pain even? It might be dull. It might be a little pinchy. How does the place feel? Maybe there's a color. Some people perceive in colors. There's no right or wrong. What do you perceive when you pay attention to this place? Now see if whatever it is that you perceive, you can do it a little bit more. Like, do it on purpose. Just a little bit. If there's tension, tense it a little bit more. If there's density, can you make the place more dense? See if you can, as if, turn up the volume of the sensations that you perceive. Keep breathing while you do this. Your breathing might change. There might now be less room for your breathing. But continue to do this. So we are now as if pulling on the thread. And we want to get to know the pattern in this place. What do you do automatically in this place that creates these sensations? Do it even a bit more without hurting yourself, obviously, but can you even exaggerate a little bit what is happening in this place? That you really feel, what do you do there? What changes when you do this? You might now feel that the tension spreads to other areas. And while you keep doing this, notice what it gives you. Why do you do this? What is it good for? How is this useful? There might not be a clear answer, more a sensation, an idea. What does it give you to do this? It might feel like an armor. It might feel like holding yourself together. It might feel like pumping yourself up. What's the use of doing this? Why is it important to do this? What could this be good for? What does it give you? And then, while you still hold this and exaggerate this pattern, start to breathe more deeply, consciously, as if pumping yourself up within this limitation. And after a couple of breaths, you let go again. You drop the effort you created, and you can now shake, bounce, stretch, dance, do whatever it takes to get rid of this again, to shake it off, to stretch it out. And now again, feel the area and feel, how does this area like to be moved? What does it want? Does it want to do like yummy little stretching movements or whatever feels nice now? Follow what your body likes. Follow what this area likes. And pay attention to what starts to take up more space within you. Maybe a quality, feeling. It might not necessarily be super pleasant, but what is it that is as if coming back to you? What is talking to you now? And give space to this with your breath, with movement. And then you can let all of this go. Find a position to rest in, standing, sitting, lying. And allow your body some time to integrate whatever it is that you set in motion. There might be very tender sensations. There still might be the urge to move. There might be some tingling. Whatever it is, stay there with your attention, welcome it, trust it. This is the intelligence of your body starting to take over. This is the door of the hidden corridor gently opening. This was a very, very short, brief exploration. I'd be very curious to hear what your experience was, if this made sense, if it was accessible, if you would maybe like a session like this in a longer format. But basically, this is the concept, this is the idea. Figure out what you do. Do it on purpose, do it more intensely, and then let it go. And for this whole process, you need energy, so you need to breathe. You need to get your heart rate up a little bit, and you need to rest after, because transformation can be very gentle, and it needs time and space to unfold. So this was today's episode on what limiting patterns are, how they are embodied, and how we can learn to let go of them. I encourage you now to have a glass of water, to take a deep breath, and let me know how you are. And hopefully see you back in 2 weeks.